There's a level of mindset so strong that it allows you to withstand anything and stay focused on your goals. A level so great that it allows you to overcome the environment you were born into and makes you stand out wherever you go. But most people fail to achieve this level of mental discipline precisely because they are trapped in the reality they have been immersed in since childhood. But let me tell you something. You're not bound by the environment you were born into. You're trapped in the version of yourself that this environment has created. And the difference between those two things is everything. Because the environment can change, the people around you can change, the neighborhood can change. But as long as the mental map you carry in your head remains the same, you will continue to arrive at the same destinations, no matter which road you choose. What you're about to see in this video isn't a list of techniques, it's a system. 10 concepts that the Japanese have developed over decades and centuries, not to motivate people, but to reprogram how the brain interprets reality, reacts to failure, and perseveres when everything indicates that it's not worth continuing. And there's a logic to it. Each concept isn't independent of the others. The first prepares the ground for the second makes the third possible, and so on until the 10th, which transforms everything that came before into something permanent. This is the map Harold didn't have, but you're about to get it. After the Second World War, a Japanese company called Toyota faced a seemingly impossible problem. Their factories were producing defective cars at a rate that shamed the industry. They had numerous assembly line problems, leading to significant rework. Beyond that, Toyota's problem was a mindset issue. Toyota's response wasn't to hire American consultants, it was to unearth a philosophical concept and apply it to the production line. Within 10 years, Toyota became the most reliable manufacturer in the world. The concept was called Kaizen, and it's just the first of 10 that we'll cover in this video. In addition to Kaizen, this video will discuss the concepts of Mushin, Zanshin, Fudoshin, Ikigai, Wabi-sabi, Gaman, Ichinen, Sejaku, and Shuhari. Together, these concepts form the perfect roadmap to reprogram your brain. But here's what most self-help books don't tell you. Kaizen works not because it's a productivity technique. It works because it corresponds exactly to how the human brain is biologically programmed to change. Researchers at Stanford University studying neuroplasticity discovered that the brain resists abrupt changes as if they were threats, activating the same alarm system it uses for predators and physical dangers. But when the change is microscopic, that alarm doesn't go off, and the transformation begins to happen beneath the radar of resistance. There was a man in Cleveland who needed to hear exactly that. He just didn't know it yet. His name was Harold, 30 years old, raised in a neighborhood where life expectancy wasn't measured in years, but in stable jobs. The kind of place where ambition was treated as arrogance, where dreaming beyond one's own address was met with the same expression people reserve for the insane. Harold worked in an accounting office where he was neither seen nor remembered. He arrived at 8 in the morning. He left at 6 in the afternoon. He sat at the same desk, opened the same files, closed the same numbers, invisible to the company, invisible to his colleagues, invisible, and this was the part that hurt the most, to himself. His wife, Susan, was a good woman, hard-working, loyal, realistic in the way that the neighborhood taught people to be realistic. She loved Harold. But she didn't believe that life could be any different. That's just how it is, Harold. Everyone lives like this. Perhaps you'll recognize yourself exactly in his story. It was on a Tuesday afternoon during his lunch break, sitting in front of a screen displaying spreadsheets that meant nothing to him, that Harold opened YouTube. He wasn't looking for Japanese philosophy. He was looking for anything that seemed different from what he'd already tried. Productivity techniques, discipline hacks, cold showers, social media fasts, waking up at 4 in the morning. He'd tried it all, and nothing had changed the substance of his life. And then a video appeared. The title read, "The Top 10 Japanese Concepts That Reprogram Your Brain." Harold clicked out of curiosity. But what happened next wasn't just watching a video. It was the beginning of the complete destruction of the mental map that the environment in which he grew up had installed in his head, and the construction of a completely new one. This channel exists for people who want to escape the mold imposed by the limited environment in which they grew up, and want to build a new life. If you are one of those people, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, because the next video this channel publishes will also be very in-depth, and you won't want to miss it. Now let's go to the video. Chapter 1. The Problem with the Map. Harold didn't grow up with a vision of failure. He grew up with a vision of survival, and that's a distinction that changes everything. Failure implies that you tried something beyond the limit. Survival implies nothing more than remaining. And when a child grows up in an environment where survival is the ultimate goal, the brain learns to treat anything beyond that as dangerous, as unreal, as material for illusion. Did Harold know this? No, not consciously. What he knew was that every time he tried something different, a new course, a business idea, a conversation with his boss about growth, a voice would immediately follow. It wasn't the voice of an external enemy. It was his own voice, and that voice would say with the calm of someone who already knows the end of the story before it even begins, "This isn't for you." Most people who watch personal development videos are trying to solve a behavioral problem. Harold had a different problem. He had an identity problem, and no productivity hack solves an identity problem. Because you can't build new behaviors on a foundation that says you don't deserve the results of those behaviors. What Harold needed wasn't motivation. He needed a reprogramming. And reprogramming always begins in the same place, with the recognition that the map you use to navigate reality is not reality. It's just the map you were given. The Japanese have a name for the first step in this process. They call it Kaizen. Chapter 2. Kaizen, the smallest unit of true change. A journey of 1,000 li begins with a single step. Lao Tzu. Kaizen is not a modern idea disguised as an ancient concept. It has roots in Zen Buddhist thought, where the idea of Ichi Nichi Isho, improving a little each day, was treated not as a strategy but as a spiritual posture. The monk who sweeps the same corridor every day with total attention is not just cleaning the corridor. He is practicing the art of being different today than he was yesterday. But it was in the 20th century that Kaizen gained its most powerful scientific validation. Researchers studying habit formation have identified what they call the paradox of abrupt change. When a person tries to transform several behaviors at the same time, or tries to make a change large enough to match the magnitude of the problem, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for self-control and planning collapses. The cognitive resources available for resistance are depleted in days, and when these resources run out, the brain automatically reverts to the previous behavior. It's not weakness, it's biology. Kaizen solves this problem surgically. It reduces the change to a size where the brain no longer perceives it as a threat. Harold was in the office when he first heard about it, through a headset with the spreadsheet screen still open. And his first reaction was the same as any intelligent person hearing this concept for the first time. This seems too small to make a difference. And that was exactly the point. What Harold didn't know, what most people don't know, is that the brain doesn't learn through the magnitude of experiences. It learns through repetition. A neuron firing along with another neuron repeatedly creates a connection that over time becomes automatic. Neuroscientists call this myelination, the process by which the brain envelops the most frequently used connections in a layer of fat that increases the speed of signal transmission up to 100 times. In other words, what you repeat, you become. And Kaizen is the system that ensures repetition happens because it makes the action small enough to be impossible to avoid. Harold made a decision during that lunch break. Not a big decision, a microscopic decision. Every day before turning on his work computer, he would spend 5 minutes studying something, anything, related to personal finance. 5 minutes. No more than that. So little that it didn't even deserve to be called a commitment. In the first week, he thought it was silly. In the second week, he started looking forward to those 5 minutes. In the third week, the 5 minutes turned into 15, because his brain had learned that it was enjoyable. But Kaizen was just the gateway, because once the door is open, you need to know where to look. Chapter 3. Zanshin, the consciousness that remains. After starting to apply Kaizen, Harold began to learn about Zanshin. Japanese archers called the state of heightened alertness that persists after an arrow is released. Zanshin. The bow has already been used. The target may or may not have been hit. The action has already taken place, and yet the archer remains fully focused, posture erect, eyes on the target, mind present. Not because there is anything more to do, but because attention is the practice, not the result of it. Zanshin is often translated as residual consciousness. But this translation misses something important. It is not consciousness that there was left over after the action. It is the awareness that decided, don't go away. Harold understood Zanshin not as a concept, but as a problem. Because what he realized in the early days of Kaizen was that he could start things. What he couldn't do was stay focused on them while doing them. He drank his breakfast thinking about work. He arrived at work thinking about the bills. He went to bed thinking about the next day. And the present moment, the only place where any real change can happen, was permanently empty. Neuroscience has a name for the condition Harold was experiencing: mind wandering. A Harvard study conducted by Matthew Killingsworth tracked the thoughts of thousands of people using a smartphone app. The result was that 47% of the time, people were not thinking about what they were doing. And there was a direct correlation between this state and unhappiness. It wasn't that people were thinking about bad things. It was that they weren't present in anything. Harold wasn't just far from his goals, he was far from his own life. Zanshin is the practice of closing that distance, not through formal meditation, not through spiritual retreats, through the deliberate act of remaining conscious of any action you take until the end, washing the dishes without thinking about anything else, listening to someone speak without preparing a response while they are still talking, finishing one task before starting the next. It seems simple, but it's radical, because Zanshin isn't just a mindfulness practice, it's a direct workout for the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that differentiates between reactive and intentional action. Every time you bring your mind back to the present moment, you literally strengthen your self-regulation capacity. It's the mental equivalent of a repetition at the gym. Harold began practicing Zanshin during the 5 minutes of Kaizen, then during meals, then during conversations with Susan. And Susan noticed. She didn't know there was a name for what had changed, but she noticed that Harold was present in a way he hadn't been before. "Are you okay?" she asked one night. "I am," he said. And it was true for the first time in years, but being present wasn't enough. Because presence without direction is just empty attention. What Harold needed now was to learn how to be present in order to something. Not just for the moments that passed, but for the inner state he carried within them. Chapter 4. Mushin. The mind that does not fight against itself. Mushin. In Japanese, in it means empty. Shin means mind. Empty mind. But empty not in the sense of absent. Empty in the sense of unobstructed. A mind without the constant noise of judgment, self-criticism, fear of failure, anticipation of shame. A mind that acts without fighting against itself. The samurai developed Mushin as a principle of combat. A warrior whose brain is occupied thinking about every movement, analyzing, planning, fearing error, is a warrior who reacts too late. The body needs to be faster than the mind. And that is only possible when the mind is clear. What Harold was experiencing was the opposite of Mushin. Every time he tried something different, any initiative, any step beyond what was expected of him, a stream of thoughts would immediately appear. What if it doesn't work? What if people laugh? What if I prove they were right about me all along? His mind wasn't working for him. It was working against him. Neuroscience calls this state rumination, the repetitive activation of threat-related circuits, even in the absence of real threats. The problem with rumination isn't just that it's uncomfortable, it's that it depletes cognitive resources that should be available for action. A ruminating brain is a brain that spends energy processing phantoms. Mushin is not the absence of thought. It is the refusal to identify with every thought that arises. Zen Buddhists had an image for this. The mind as a sky and thoughts as clouds. Clouds appear, cross the sky, and disappear. The sky doesn't fight the clouds. It doesn't try to force them away. It doesn't become the clouds. It simply remains what it is, vast, still, present. Harold practiced Mushin in a simple way. Every time a self-sabotaging thought appeared, he named it in a low voice. Fear of judgment. Expectation of failure. UCLA research on affective regulation showed that the simple act of naming an emotion reduces activity in the amygdala, the region of the brain associated with the threat response, to a measurable extent. You don't eliminate the thought, you put it in its place. Harold began to realize that the voice that said, "This is not for you," it wasn't his voice. It was the echo of an environment that needed him to remain where he was, for that environment to make sense. And once you realize that, the power of that voice diminishes forever. But Mushin opens up a space, and spaces need to be filled with something real. Harold now needed to discover what was real within him, what he truly wanted, beyond what the neighborhood said was possible. Chapter 5. Ikigai, the force that needs no fuel. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Viktor Frankl. The island of Okinawa has the highest concentration of centenarians in the world. Researchers who went to study why expected to find special diets, extraordinary exercise routines, or privileged genetics. What they found was something much simpler. The inhabitants of Okinawa didn't wake up in the morning thinking about what they needed to do. They woke up thinking about why they were alive. Ikigai, the Japanese word that combines iki, life, and gai, value, merit. This is the concept that describes this reason for living. Not an objective, not a deadline-bound goal. A fundamental reason that organizes everything around itself. The difference between motivation and ikigai is the difference between a campfire and the sun. Motivation needs fuel. It needs visible results, external validation, measurable progress. When the fuel runs out, the campfire goes out. Ikigai doesn't need fuel because it's not a flame, it's the heat source itself. Harold spent years trying to motivate himself. To-do lists, vision boards, midnight alarms to not waste time. And every time the motivation lasted for weeks, sometimes days, and then vanished at the first sign of real resistance. What he had never asked was the question that lay beneath all the others. Why specifically do you need this to change? Not because it would be good if it changed, not because it makes logical sense for it to change, but because you, with your specific history, with the specific people you love, with the specific moments you don't want to miss, why do you need it to be any different? Harold thought for a long time, and the answer that came wasn't about money or status or proving anything to the neighborhood. The answer was, I don't want my daughter, if I ever have one, to learn that the world has a low ceiling. Harold didn't have children yet, but the image was real. The child he imagined growing up inside the same invisible cage he had inherited, that image was real, and he couldn't stop seeing it. That was his ikigai. And from then on, mornings changed, because he no longer woke up trying to convince himself that it was worthwhile. He woke up knowing. And there is a real neurological difference between these two states. Research on the dopaminergic system shows that behaviors connected to internal purposes, those that correspond to a person's most fundamental values, activate the reward circuit in a sustained way, unlike behaviors connected to external rewards, which produce peaks followed by collapse. Ikigai doesn't eliminate difficult days. It ensures you know why you're awake even on them. But knowing why you want to get somewhere doesn't solve the problem of how to deal with the days when the path seems blocked. Chapter 6. Wabi-sabi, the beauty of cracks. Harold had his first serious seizure on the 32nd day. It wasn't a dramatic crisis. There was no visible breakdown, no scene, no crying. It was something smaller and more devastating. He spent an entire week doing nothing of what he had committed to doing. 7 days. Without the 5 minutes of Kaizen. Without Zanshin at mealtimes, without anything. The trigger was a conversation with his older brother Darren, who had come to visit them at their apartment. Darren was the kind of person the neighborhood produced with industrial efficiency, pragmatic to the point of cruelty, skeptical of anything that didn't fit within what he already saw working around him. Harold mentioned in passing that he was studying Japanese philosophy, that he was trying to reprogram the way he thought. Darren gave a short laugh, the laugh of someone who genuinely thinks the other person is fooling themselves. Harold, You work in an accounting office in Cleveland. Japanese philosophy isn't going to change that. Susan was in the kitchen. She didn't say anything, but Harold saw her expression, not one of agreement, but of someone who doesn't know what to contradict because she's still unsure which version of her husband's story to believe. He went to sleep that night, burdened by a broken conviction, and for the next 7 days, Mushin's voice was weaker than Darren's. On the 8th day, Harold sat at the breakfast table, doing nothing, staring at the glass of water he had poured but hadn't drunk. And he thought, I've already wasted 7 days. Why start over now? That phrase, why start over now, is where most transformations die. Not in the failure itself, but in the interpretation of failure as definitive evidence of incompetence. The Japanese have a word for what Harold needed at that moment. Not a motivational word, an aesthetic word. Goodbye. The philosophy of Wabi-sabi starts from a premise that contradicts everything that modern Western culture teaches about excellence. Imperfection is not the opposite of beauty. It is where true beauty resides. The most frequently cited example is kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken objects with gold. The repaired bowl is worth more than the intact one because the cracks are the object's history. They are proof that it existed, was used, was real. Harold wasn't a bowl, but the principle was the same. 7 lost days didn't erase 32 days of consistency. Just as a crack doesn't erase the value of an object, the crack is part of it, of the object. Abandonment would mean discarding the bowl. Returning it was kintsugi, filling the fracture with something more valuable than the original material. Harold drank the glass of water. Because Wabi-sabi had done something that motivation had never been able to. It had removed the catastrophic weight of imperfection. You don't need to protect your sequence. You need to restore the sequence. And to return without drama, without self-flagellation, without the exhausting ritual of promising that this time will be different, to return with the serenity of someone who knows that imperfection was part of the process from the beginning. This return is stronger than ever, having broken the streak. Neuroscience calls the opposite phenomenon the what the hell effect. When a person violates a rule they have imposed on themselves, the emotional response to failure often leads to a cascade of behaviors that are even more contrary to the original goal. I've already eaten the cake, I'll eat the rest too. Wabi-sabi is the direct antidote to this effect because it removes the premise that there was a rule to be broken. There is no violation. There is a trajectory, and trajectories include deviations. But Harold realized there was something Wabi-sabi couldn't solve. He could accept imperfection, but there were still days when the path simply seemed too resistant, days when he wasn't doubting himself, but doubting whether the effort was worth the weight it cost. For that, the Japanese had another concept, and this was the oldest of them all. Chapter 7. Gaman, Enduring the Unbearable with Dignity. In 1942, the United States government ordered the relocation of over 100,000 Japanese Americans to internment camps. They lost their homes, businesses, and property. They were treated as enemies in the country where they were born or had spent their lives. And what historical records show about the behavior of these communities within the camps is something that scholars still cite as one of the most extraordinary examples of collective resilience documented in the 20th century. There were carefully cultivated gardens. There were schools organized by the inmates themselves. There was art. There was dignity maintained in conditions that would have justified total collapse. The concept behind this had a name: Gaman. Gaman. To endure the unbearable with patience and dignity, not passive resignation, not denial of pain, but the refusal to let external circumstances determine one's inner state. Harold wasn't in an internment camp, but there was a form of pressure he knew well, the constant silent pressure of an environment that treats his transformation as a threat to collective stability. Darren wasn't a villain. He was a mechanism of social homeostasis. Every system, family, social, professional, tends to resist changes in its members because each member occupies a function within the group's equilibrium. When someone starts to change, the group involuntarily tries to pull them back, not out of malice, out of an instinct for the preservation of the system. Harold felt this pressure every day, in his brother's passing comments, in Susan's hesitant expression, In his office colleagues who joked about that Japanese thing of yours, Gaman isn't about ignoring that pressure. It's about learning to carry it without letting it dictate your next move. Researchers studying discomfort tolerance have identified that the ability to endure negative internal states, frustration, boredom, doubt, physical and emotional discomfort, is one of the most reliable predictors of long-term success in any domain. Not intelligence, not talent, discomfort tolerance is comfort. And this tolerance, contrary to what most people believe, is not a fixed personality trait. It's a skill that is built up just like a muscle. Through progressive exposure to controlled doses of resistance, Harold practiced Gaman in a way that didn't seem practical. He stopped trying to make the process comfortable. He stopped seeking out days when he felt like it. He started doing it on days when he didn't, not because he had proven something to himself, but because he was learning that discomfort was a message, not a sentence. He said, "This is difficult. No, you shouldn't do that." But there was a limit to what Gaman could sustain alone. Because enduring without direction is exhaustion, and Harold needed to learn to focus what he could endure, to direct all that energy not on multiple simultaneous fronts, but on one absolute intention at a time. Chapter 8. Ichinen. One intention, one universe. There is a principle in Japanese Buddhism that Westerners rarely encounter outside of esoteric texts. It comes from the Nichiren school, 18th century, and was synthesized in a phrase that has generated centuries of philosophical debate. Ichinen Sansen. In a single moment of thought 3,000 world, the idea is complex, but its core is accessible. The quality of a single intention, when absolute, has the power to reorganize everything around it. Ichinen, a thought, an intention, is not concentration in the Western sense of focus. It is something more radical. It is the ability to place your entire existence behind a single direction long enough for that direction to become inevitable. Harold had a problem that is universal among people who begin transformation processes, a dispersion of intention. He wanted to improve his financial situation. He wanted to improve his relationships. He wanted to leave the accounting office. He wanted to be more present for Susan. He wanted to study more. He wanted to sleep better. He wanted, and each want competed with all the others for energy, attention, and time. The result was that none progressed quickly enough to generate the positive feedback that sustains continuity. Ichinen proposes a surgery. Choose an intention. Not the most important one, not the most urgent one. The one that, if resolved, makes all others easier or unnecessary. And dedicate yourself entirely to it. For Harold, after weeks of thinking, the answer was clear. The central intention was to develop a marketable skill outside the accounting office. Everything else, the finances, the relationships, being there for Susan, leaving the job, depended on that. It was the key. And from the moment he stopped dividing his energy across 10 fronts and focused it on one, something changed in the speed of his progress. Not because he worked longer hours, because he began working with less internal resistance. A mind that isn't questioning what it should be doing can dedicate itself entirely to what it's doing. The neuroscience underpinning Ichinen lies in research on task-switching cost, the phenomenon whereby each time the brain switches from one task to another, there is a measurable cognitive cost. This cost is not trivial. Studies show it can reduce cognitive efficiency by up to 40%. A mind that serves many masters serves none with excellence. But Ichinen is not just a principle of productivity, it's a principle of identity. Because when you fully commit to an intention for long enough, you stop being someone who, this thing begins to be someone for whom this thing is natural. Intention becomes identity. And it was there, by focusing all his energy in one direction, that Harold began to find the state that the samurai described as the closest thing to human perfection. Chapter 9. Sejaku. The silence that builds. There's one scene that Harold kept forever. It was a Wednesday night. Susan had gone out to visit her mother. The apartment was empty. Harold sat at the kitchen table with nothing in front of him. No cell phone, no computer, no television on. just a cup of tea slowly cooling. And for a moment he wasn't thinking about anything. He wasn't planning for the next day. He wasn't revisiting his conversation with Darren. He wasn't worrying about the month's bills. He wasn't monitoring his own progress or assessing whether he was on the right track. It was just there. And within that silence, without him being able to explain where it came from, the clearest clarity Harold had felt in years emerged. He knew exactly what the next step was. The Japanese call this state Sejaku silence, but not the silence of absence, the silence of active stillness, a state of repose that is simultaneously alert. The kanji representing Sejaku is often depicted next to a waterfall, not the absence of water, but the force of water moving with such consistency that it seems still. Modernity has declared war on Sejaku without warning. Every potential space for silence has been filled. The elevator has music, the bathroom has cell phones, traffic jams have podcasts, dinner has television. And the implicit premise is that silence is empty, that being without stimulation is wasting time. Neuroscience categorically contradicts this. In 2013, researchers studying neural regeneration in mice accidentally discovered that 2 hours of silence a day stimulated the growth of new cells in the hippocampus, the region associated with memory and learning. The control group, exposed to relaxing music, did not show the same effect. Silence, and not generic relaxation, was the active element. Studies on the glymphatic system, the mechanism by which the brain removes metabolic waste during states of deep rest, show that this system operates at minimum capacity during states of continuous stimulation. In other words, a brain that never rests literally accumulates the waste it produces. Sejaku is not formal meditation. It is not a protocol. It is the practice of allowing spaces to exist where no input competes for your attention, and of treating these spaces not as vacuums to be filled, but as the terrain where the mind does its most important work without you needing to supervise it. Harold began to protect silence as he protected any other limited resource. A walk without headphones, breakfast without a screen, 10 minutes before bed without any devices. And it was within one of those silences that he made the decision that changed the trajectory of the next 2 years. But for this decision to be sustainable, for it not to be just another resolution he would erase at the first sign of resistance, Harold needed the last and most powerful of the 10 concepts. The concept that wasn't about starting, it was about never stopping. Chapter 10. Shuhari, the complete map of mastery. First learn the rules as if they were laws, then deform them like clay, finally abandon them as if they didn't exist. Ziami Motokyo, 14th century Shuhari is not a concept, it's a map, originally developed in Japanese martial arts and no theater. Shuhari describes the 3 inevitable stages of any genuine mastery process. Shu. The beginner follows the form with absolute precision. They don't question, they don't innovate, they don't personalize. They learn the movement exactly as it was taught, repeating, 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 until the movement no longer needs conscious attention to exist. Ha! Breaking through. Once the form is internalized, the practitioner begins to question, to test the limits, to understand. Because the rule exists, what it is protecting, what it is building, and from this understanding, one begins to adapt it. Not out of rebellion, but out of profound comprehension. Transcend. Form ceases to be an external structure and becomes a natural expression of the practitioner. The rules haven't been abandoned, they've been absorbed. The master doesn't need to think about Kaizen because he has become someone who continuously improves by nature. He doesn't practice Zanshin because he maintains total attention by instinct. He doesn't apply Mushin because he no longer fights against himself by default. Harold recognized where he was when he first read about Shuhari. He was in Shu, and that wasn't weakness. It was precisely where he should be. The problem most people have is that they want to go straight to Ri. They want the wisdom of the master without the work of the beginner. They want the fluidity of mastery without the necessary rigor of the foundation. And Shuhari says, with the patience of someone who has seen this mistake 1,000 times, there is no shortcut between the first and third stages. Ha and Rai are consequences of Shu. They are what happens naturally when Shu is practiced with sufficient depth. The neuroscience that validates Shuhari lies in Anders Ericsson's studies on deliberate practice, the research that generated the famous 10,000-hour hypothesis. What Ericsson discovered was not that any type of practice led to mastery. It was that structured practice, within a system with clear feedback, followed by reflection and progressive adjustment, was the only reliable path to what he called high-quality mental representations, the cognitive structures that allow the expert to see patterns and make decisions that the beginner simply cannot see. Shu is structured practice. Ha is feedback and adjustment. Rai is the mental representation that becomes identity. Harold didn't arrive at Rai within the time frame covered by this itinerary. Nobody arrives in months. But he reached a point where the entire map made sense as a system, where each concept ceased to be a separate idea and became part of a coherent mechanism. Kaizen was the method of progression. Zanshin was the quality of attention that made progress visible. Mushin was the inner cleansing that made action possible without struggle. Ikigai was the fuel that didn't need refueling. Wabi-sabi was the structure that made failure non-fatal. Gaman was the ability to continue, even when there was no immediate reward. Ichinen was the concentration that made effort efficient. Sejaku was the silence where all of this integrated. And Shuhari was the map that showed where he was on the path and ensured that there was a path with a real destination, even when it wasn't visible. Harold was no longer the man who drank coffee while looking at spreadsheets during his lunch break. Not because the spreadsheets had disappeared, not because Cleveland had changed, because the map had changed. But here's what Harold only understood much later, the part that completely changes the meaning of everything that came before. 2 years after that afternoon at the accounting office, Harold was in a meeting with a small client his firm had hired for an audit. The client was a local businessman, Marcus Webb, who had started a financial consulting firm from scratch and had grown consistently over the past 3 years, while larger competitors stagnated. Harold was asking the standard audit questions when Marcus interrupted him. "You ask questions differently than the other auditors who came before you. Like this? You listen to the answer before formulating the next question. Most people don't do that." Harold didn't know what to answer immediately, because it wasn't a technique, it was Zanshin. But he wasn't using Zanshin. It was simply who he was now. Marcus swiped his card. "If you ever want to work in a different environment, give me a call." Harold looked at the card. He looked at the audit room. He looked at the spreadsheets. And I knew that moment hadn't come from nowhere. It had emerged from 2 years of 5-minute Kaizen sessions, from protected silences, from 7 days of fractures repaired with Wabi-sabi, from Gaman carried in silence without anyone seeing. The world hadn't opened up for Harold. Harold had become someone for whom the world opens up. This is the difference that no productivity hack can create. And that 10 Japanese concepts, applied as a system, can... There are 10 concepts in this video, but there is only one truth. The mind you have now is not the mind you are condemned to have. Kaizen proves that any change is possible, if it's small enough to start today. Zanshin proves that presence isn't a state reserved for monks. It's a skill you train every time you decide not to run from the moment. Mushin proves that the voice that speaks, this is not for you. It's not yours. It's merely an echo of an environment that needed you to stay where you were. Ikigai proves that motivation is the wrong fuel, and that there's another deeper one that doesn't need refueling. Wabi-sabi proves that the crack doesn't end the story. It's where the story gets more interesting. Gaman proves that discomfort isn't a sign you're in the wrong place. It's a sign you're growing. Ichinen proves that divided energy leads nowhere in terms of depth. Sejaku proves that silence is not emptiness. It's the laboratory where the mind does its most important work. And Shuhari proves that there is no shortcut to mastery, but there is a map. And having the map changes absolutely everything. Harold didn't change because he found the right answers. It changed because he stopped using the wrong map. You can do the same. Not when circumstances improve, not when those around you understand today. With the smallest possible action that is still real, because the journey doesn't begin when you're ready. It begins when you take the first step before you are. If you've made it this far, You've already demonstrated something most people don't have: the ability to hold on to an idea long enough to truly let it sink in. I invite you to subscribe to the channel, because whenever you need it, one of my videos will appear in your YouTube feed. And if you want to continue down this path now, one of the videos appearing on your screen was made specifically for what you're experiencing. Thank you very much for your attention, and remember, be present, walk with honor, follow the path until the next video.